We are live now.
So I start, yes?
Yeah, let me start with the small introduction. So, all right, we have some people coming in. Let us know the region you belong to in the chat. Awesome. Hello, and thanks for joining. And let me start with a small introduction. So, yeah, my name is Aryan, and just let me turn on that to yeah, it's on. So I'm one of the dean alchemists at Covalent, and have been working with the other deans in terms of getting this workshop started, where the alchemist or the community member, you can come and join. Either you connect with a like-minded individual, talk about the subject that that are important, and also teach different skills and like technical and lifestyle-based workshops. So yeah, I'm very excited about this. We have Artem and also known as Enzo, Vityam and Mehta as professor, who are going to teach us about the basic principle of 3D photorealism. Also, I want to add this that this workshop is the most registered workshop ever. So I can see a lot of people are interested to learn about the basic principle of 3D photorealism. If you have any question, then feel free to write in chats and Q&A. So without any delay, I want to hand over this to the professor of this workshop.
So I can start, yes?
Yes.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm going to be your guide to photorealism. More specifically, I'm going to be talking about the principles of the photorealistic rendering. Let's start with why photorealism is actually important. You might know that Hollywood allows themselves some CGI. You might not even notice, but in this shot from The Great Gatsby, actually the entire set is CGI. CGI, for your information, is abbreviature, which means computer-generated image. Yeah, basically computer graphics. You might know there are some location costs for these sets, or this location was already booked, or there was bad weather or something else. So they had to use the CGI for this shot specifically. And also, if you shoot something in camera, you can change it. You can't change it after the effect if your director decides it. So it's actually using CGI elements. It is much more flexible. Also, some low-budget studios like Game of Thrones, well, actually not low budget, but still, they use elements of CGI in all their series. Also, we have some footage from the Captain America, the Winter Soldier. Like 80% of the movie was CGI, because CGI actually allows a lot of creative possibilities. It allows a lot of stories to be told, which wouldn't be possible with the real life. Actually, pretty much every superhero movie wouldn't be possible without the CGI elements in it. Also games, well, they were CGI for ages, but this is some footage from the game from 2016, Uncharted 4 at Thief's End. You can see these faces clearly look photorealistic as they could at this time. Games also depend on photorealism a lot. Yeah, if you look at the usage of CGI over time, you can see as the technology goes up, industries and studios use CGI more and more in their production, and the real life elements goes down, which is actually great news for every 3D artist, but they all want photorealism. If you look closely at those examples that I gave before, like Hollywood, games, even some art that you would like to make, it all depends on the photorealistic elements. Because if you don't make it look photorealistic, it's gonna throw away your audience from the story that you want to tell. Yeah. So I believe that photorealism is the most important goal for every CGI artist. Yeah, but you might also ask the question, what about Disney? What about Pixar? What about any other studio that clearly do not go the route of photorealism? For example, this shot from Big Hero 6, you can see those characters. They are clearly not photorealistic. There are some exaggerated proportions. Yeah, non-photorealistic animation. But actually, if you look closely, there are a lot of photorealistic elements, like, for example, their hair, their clothes, their fabric, the way it moves with the body. So actually, there are a lot of photorealistic elements that you didn't notice, but they are there. Also, you might imagine it as this, like you can choose two paths. You can go the realistic route, or you can go cartoony, like stylizing your work. But in reality, it looks something like this. You start with the photorealism, and only then you can go and stylize your work, because actually stylizing is a very delicate process. Yeah, you have to know what to pull and what not to pull. Like you can just make eyes bigger and that's all. There are a lot of elements, there are a lot of details you have to know. And if you don't go, if you don't know the photorealism, you can't just, you have to go through photorealism anyway. So yeah, photorealism is the most important goal for every CGI artist. Yeah, so let's move on to how to actually achieve photorealism. You can imagine it as a two-story building, because photorealism consists of 4 building blocks. They are modeling as the base foundation, 2 stories materials and lighting, and the roof is post-processing. So we're going to be discussing those 4 blocks and details right now. Let's start with a quote from Alex Roman, a very famous 3D artist. 90% of the time, the materials and lighting carry the weight of creating truly photorealistic imagery. And I actually agree with this quote, because if you look at this image, you can see that lighting and materials carry a lot of weight. They are the most important elements of the photorealism. So let's start with modeling. Modeling is the foundation. If you done it right, if you do not done it right, it's gonna make everything that you make after it pretty much useless, because the building, it all depends on the base, the modeling. Yeah, so we're going to start with the definition. Photorealistic modeling is matching the proportions and form of the real world object. So I'm going to give you some tips. Tip number 1, keep it in real world scale. So a lot of times you end up scaling things by eye, but actually human eye is very bad at proportions because we put more weight to things that we pay more attention to. So you have to make sure that you use real world scale, like metric units, for example, or imperial if you're from USA. Also, you can Google, for example, the dimensions of the object that you want to make. For example, the ceiling height is about 2.4 meters on average. So, and then you just put these units into your 3D software of choice. For example, I use Blender, so we're gonna have some images from Blender. Yeah, so I put the Z dimension 2.4 meters. Let's move on. Tip number 2, never a sharp edge. So in real life, 90-degree angles, 90-degree edges does not exist actually. Everything got a bevel, even microscopical, like the razor, for example. You might think it's very sharp, but actually if you look at it under a microscope, for example, you're gonna see a slight edge because everything got a bevel. Yeah, in 3D, 90-degree edge comes by default. Like you can see, you add a cube, and it has all these nasty 90-degree angles. So you have to use bevel tool. It's actually pretty simple in most softwares, but it does add up in the final picture. Let's move on. And tip number 3, use reference. And nothing beats the real thing. Nothing beats the real thing as a reference. For example, I model a lot of things as I'm a 3D artist myself. And if I can have a real thing to have as a reference, for example, this barrel, I use it every time. So yeah, always use reference. And tip number 4, know your anatomy. So if you're going to be modeling some humans, you have to study the anatomy of the human faces because actually faces need special attention. Human eyes are very good at detecting flaws in human faces. So even subtle differences make a big change. Yeah, this is some course on anatomy by Scott Eaton. So we're gonna sum it up. Modeling consists of 4 tips. Keep it in real world scale, never a sharp edge, use reference, and know your anatomy. Yeah, so now you're gonna move on to materials and I'm gonna give the words to another speaker.
Yes, materials is another important thing. If you spend 4 hours making keyboard graphics, you should put 2 hours into materials. If the texture or shading is slightly off, you're gonna notice that. Can you change slides? Photorealistic materials are when the shading and textures match real world materials. You must use real world models and materials for the better results. Tip number 1, use physically accurate shades. You can look at this picture and saw difference. Shades is very important for photorealistic. Next tip, use PBR maps. you can saw difference with this. It's look much better. Next tip is use surface imperfections. It's most important 3 tips with materials. You must use materials as in real life, and you must know how it in real life. It's the key for this part. Next important thing is lighting. Next speaker can tell more about this.
Okay, what about lighting? Lighting that matches the color, direction, and intensity seen in real life. And tip number 1, use real world like direction. How you can see, it's very important. Use when you use the correct color, you can if you don't forget reflection, you can change your picture to much better. Use the high dynamic range images. Photos that power the lighting and reflection. You just download the HDR and lighting, it's done. It's brilliant. They cast the reflections, which are very important for rendering highly for even not so reflexible surface. How you can see lighting? Lighting is lighting consists of use the real world direction, ensure the correct color, and use HDRs if possible. And what about post-processing? Post-processing, it's the next very important thing. Post-processing, photorealistic post-processing is recreating imperfection from real-life cameras. Brandon Bennett I think very strongly that one should come to CG as one does to photography. You can have a perfect technical mastery and still fail as an artist if you frame. Composed or light you shot in a poor way. What about glare? Glare is most prevalent with images which have a mesh of object in it. It's quite easy And to edit composite using the glare node. Simple thing makes a lot of difference. Motion blur. Motion blur most obvious at low light conditions because shutter has to be operated for longer. Also, moving object, just check the box. Depth of field, it's very important. Only one thing you can be in focus ever, object or background. Depth of field shows always be on. Even best lens have to take multiple depth shots to switch them later. In Blender, it goes by default, however, it's physical impossibility. Chromatic, next slide, please. Chromatic aberration. Chromatic aberration must commonly happen with trees on the skies. It's something bring meeting dark, most apparent in cheap lenses, but use it strangely, so much gonna make it look like the shot was made with a very creepy lens. Barrel distortion. One of the things photographers hate, every straight edge has some bend to it to do the barrel distortion. So everything is slightly bent. That's why it's important to add. Use the super subtly. And how you can see, post-processing contains of glare, motion blur, depth of field, chromatic aberration, barrel distortion. And if you follow all of these devices, you're still gonna hit only 90% of the photoreal look. Everything else, it's just following references. It comes with practice. Most people will overlook little teeny details, but it's something that you would pick up with practice. And how you can see in this picture, the most important things is modeling, materials, lighting, and post-processing. Modeling contains model to real world scale, bevel everything, reference is, and you can see reference is kind, know you anatomy, materials use physically actual shaders, use PBR maps, add surface imperfections, lighting use the real world direction, use the correct color, don't forget reflections. And post-processing contains of glare, motion blur, depth of field, chromatic aberration, and barrel distortion. It's a very important thing. And go make some renders. Thanks for watching.
Also, I'm gonna interrupt you, sorry. We had some questions in the chat.
But I have recently started to use Blender. Is there any YouTube tutorials you would recommend for beginners? Also, can I achieve a good result from the free version? So who would you like to take this question?
Yeah, of course. So I'm gonna tell you that Blender is actually free forever. Everything that comes with it, with the free version, is everything that it's got. So there are no paid versions, no paid plugins, no paid everything. So Blender is open source. It's under GNU license, which means it's gonna be free forever. Yeah. So actually, also Blender community is actually very helpful. Blender community has a lot of art pages, a lot of tutorials on YouTube. For example, I would recommend you the Andrew Price tutorials. You just type it in YouTube. You can just type in Blender Guru. It's his name on YouTube. So he actually got tutorials on pretty much everything in Blender. Also, I can recommend you the course that he has on the donut, in which he makes the donut in Blender in CG, and not only that. So it's like the beginner course that you have to take in order to start your Blender career, you can say. Yeah. I can also give you the link in the chat. Just a second. Here it is. And then I can also answer the question.
Okay, and for the rendering?
Yeah, that's it.
Blender is good for rendering also, right?
Sorry, can you repeat?
I'm saying Blender is good for rendering, right?
Is Blender good for rendering? Yes.
Rendering the video.
Yeah, Blender has its own render engine, which was developed by the Blender team. It's called Cycles. It's a ray tracing engine, unbiased in pretty much on all aspects, which means that materials which come with it, they all have photorealistic like appearance, because some renderers, for example, Corona render, if you know this, you have to tweak the shaders in order to make it look like in real world. But Cycles, it all comes by default. So you have a principal shader, it's called. You can tweak a lot of values. You can make pretty much any material that you want. Also, Blender supports caustics. It's the light that is going through the transparent surfaces, though it's very slow to render, but it supports it nonetheless. So yeah, you can make a lot of good pictures, renders with Cycles. You can even use it in production. A lot of studios already use it in production. For example, like this image that you can see is made with Blender entirely. It's used Cycles render engine, and yeah, Corona is the best of the best. But Vire is my professional. Well, actually, Cycles also getting more and more better. And also in the new version of Blender 3.0, the new Cycles X is coming out. It's much more efficient, much more faster. Yeah. Also, I have another question in the chat. Yeah, do you use Blender commercially? I find very few companies use it because you don't get any commercial support as with, for example, Cinema 4D, Maya, or similar. Actually, I don't use it commercially. I use it for my freelance work, but still, I know some studios on Netflix. For example, I can't remember the name of the movie, but it uses Blender entirely. Even the render engine Eevee, which is much more faster. But yeah, I know that Blender does not have support, but it's actually very stable. I didn't have any crashes in the stable version, like for a long time. It's much more stable than Cinema 4D, Maya, or anything else, because actually Blender itself weighs only 200 megabytes. So yeah, the movie is named Next Gen. Yeah, you're right.
Arjun, do you want to add something into this?
Render engines are free on them. Yeah, they are all free. It has 2 render engines by default, Cycles and Eevee. Yeah, I already talked about them. So yeah. Corona, etc. Yeah, you can download Corona. There are some paid renderers and some free. For example, ProRender by AMD, it's free. So you can download it and use it in Blender.
Another question. What program of material do you use? Where do you get materials? What do you do?
Yeah, I understood. So yeah, you can download a lot of textures from some websites. For example, I know a good website which is called Polygon. It's actually Andrew Price's site, which I already talked about him. He's Blender guru in YouTube. So yeah, I have a subscription to his website, and he has a lot of textures. Also, he has a lot of models and pretty much everything you would need for a 3D render. Also, there are a lot of other sites which are free. For example, HDR Haven for HDR images, high dynamic range images, or for example, HDRI textures. It's for textures, yeah, as you can guess. So yeah, that's it. Epic Games Megascan. Yeah, they recently made the Epic Games Megascan library free, so you can use it for your work for free.
Does anybody wants to ask any question?
HDR having top. Yeah, I agree. So does anybody have more questions?
Feel free to ask in Q&A and chats.
Configurations of my computer. Actually, I wanna tell you that Blender, you don't have to have like super top computer to run it. You can even use like your 2008 computer as long as it has Windows 7. Yeah, so it's just the question of how long do you want to wait for your renders to render. Yeah, so my computer has RTX 380, AMD Ryzen 7 360X. Yeah, for the memory, I have 32 gigs of RAM. Yeah, like that.
Does anybody wants to ask any questions?
For rendering, I wanna say that your GPU is the most important thing that you would like to invest in if you want to become a 3D artist. Have you watched any training courses? Yeah, of course, I watched a lot of courses, especially on YouTube, because it's free and YouTube has a lot of courses on Blender, even free one. Also, I watched some courses on Skillshare. There are some good courses by Southern Shoti, if you know him. Yeah, you can just type in Skillshare and he'll have some courses on Blender on animation and materials and so on.
I guess we are done with the Q&As.
Okay.
So anyone wants to ask any question? Okay, one more. Are you modeling or visualizing architecture?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Are you modeling or visualizing architecture?
Okay. Are you modeling or visualizing the architecture? Well, I'm actually just artist that wants to make things that I like. I don't like only like to visualize architecture. I actually modeled a lot of things, like starting with some just basic assets to like photoreal environments. So yeah, I'm just like doing whatever I want to make. I'm just like a freelance artist, so I just choose whatever I want to do and I work for it.
Which game do you like the most in terms of working?
Which game do you like the most in terms of working out the world? Working out the world, what do you mean? I just didn't quite understood. Okay. You mean the world of the game? Yes. Well, I actually am very impressed by the GTA series. Yeah, GTA series. So yes, especially GTA 5. Also, well, I don't really play a lot of games, so yes, I don't have time for it. Yeah, thanks for the questions.
So thanks everyone for the workshop. And yeah, I would like to thanks all the attendees for joining this workshop. And yeah, and last time I want to ask if you have any question, then feel free to ask. And, yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Goodbye.